Hey everyone, and welcome to Beyond the Body. Today let's talk about something deep, spiritual awakening. You see, most people don't make it through a spiritual awakening, not because it kills them, but because it brings up something so raw, so real, and so wild that the identity they've spent their whole life building begins to fall apart. They start to feel overwhelmed. They pull back, go numb, and return to the comfort of their old life. Why? Because real truth doesn't set you free right away. It breaks you first. It shatters the illusions you believed in, the stories you told yourself, and the masks you wore for so long that they felt like your own skin. This is the part no one talks about, the painful side of awakening. It's not just about peace or light. It's also about silence so loud it shakes your soul. It's a kind of inner earthquake that makes everything feel unfamiliar. The world doesn't fall apart physically, but inside, everything you believed about yourself, your goals, and even your faith starts to feel empty. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Awakening often begins not with joy, but with a crisis, a deep feeling that the life you've built just doesn't feel right anymore. Not because it was fake, but because it was only meant to protect you until you were ready to face something deeper. And now you are. Something ancient inside you is waking up. And once it does, you can't go back. The dreams you chased feel strange. The people around you feel distant. The pleasures you once enjoyed no longer satisfy you. You're left with a silence that drowns out your old self. This is what people call ego death. Not just a metaphor, but a real inner breakdown of who you thought you were. If you resist it, it hurts more. If you fight it, it feels like madness. But if you surrender, yes, it still breaks you. But in that breaking, you catch a glimpse of something eternal. This is why many people turn back. The old self doesn't go easily. It clings, it screams, and it tries to convince you that you're just depressed or lost. And maybe you are, but only because the map you were given was never meant to lead you back to your true self. You were taught how to fit in, how to succeed, but not how to be real, how to go deep inside, or how to listen to the quiet voice of your soul. So yes, the journey downward can feel like destruction, but in truth, it's a sacred invitation. It's a spiritual initiation, a return to who you were always meant to be. You'll be asked to let go of people, labels, masks, and parts of yourself you thought would last forever. And you must let go. Because if you hold on, those things will start to rot in your hands. Spiritual awakening doesn't give you a better version of your old life. It burns the old life down. And then it waits to see what rises from the ashes. Still, most people turn back. They choose comfort over truth, approval over authenticity, the known cage over the wild unknown, because the wilderness is scary. It speaks in a language your mind can't always understand. It asks you to feel deeply, to stay present, and to face your true reflection, no matter what it shows you. So tell me, have you ever felt your world shift in a way that made everything suddenly seem unfamiliar? What you try to forget doesn't disappear, it returns. And often it shows up as your shadow. But your shadow isn't your enemy. It's a long-lost part of you, begging to be seen, heard, and welcomed home. It's the part of you that raged, that cried, that tried to control everything out of fear. The part that didn't receive love, so it learned to survive without it. To fully awaken, you have to invite that part of yourself in. You have to sit with your shadow, not with judgment or fear, but with compassion. And that's not easy, because the shadow doesn't speak in gentle words. It speaks in pain, in triggers, in emotional reactions. It shows up when you sabotage the things you want most. It lives in your jealousy, your defensiveness, your addictions. And unless you turn toward it and face it, you'll stay stuck in the same patterns again and again. What most people don't realize is that spiritual awakening isn't the end of suffering. It's the beginning of facing it, honestly, consciously, and fully. That's why so few people truly make it through. Awakening asks for everything: your grief, your anger, your silence, and your willingness to let go of who you thought you were without knowing who you'll become. It asks you to die while still breathing. to lose your mind, so you can find your soul, to watch your entire identity fall apart and still say yes. And that's when the journey truly begins. Awakening doesn't need your strength, it needs your surrender. And that terrifies the ego, because the ego was built on control. Control over your emotions, your image, your story. It was created to survive in a world that punishes vulnerability. But your soul didn't come here just to survive. It came here to become. And becoming requires unmaking. You have to unmake the armor, unmake the stories, unmake the version of yourself that was built from fear, not truth. Only then can something real emerge. And that real part of you, it doesn't scream. It doesn't beg for attention. It waits quietly until the noise dies down, the masks slip, and the mind finally gets tired of running in circles. Then it whispers, not in words, but in a deep ache. An ache for something more. Not more success, not more approval, more real, more whole, more alive. That ache is not a mistake. It's not depression. It's not dysfunction. It's the call, a sacred signal that you're ready to leave the old life behind. But here's the hard truth. Most people hear that call and pretend it's nothing. They bury it with achievements, numb it with distractions, cover it up with busy routines. Because answering the call means tearing down the world you built in sand. And no one warns you how lonely that can feel. The first stage of awakening isn't beauty, it's exile. Exile from the familiar, from your socially acceptable self, from the validation you didn't even realize you depended on. And in that space, you'll want to go back. You'll crave the comfort, the numbness, the illusion of control. But something inside you won't let you go back. Not anymore. Because once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. Once you've felt the weight of your own soul, you can't return to living on the surface. So you wander through sleepless nights, quiet mornings filled with unexplained tears, and relationships that suddenly feel empty, even when nothing went wrong. You're in the space between selves, the cocoon, the void, the sacred unknown. The place where everything old has died, but nothing new has taken root yet. It's terrifying, it's powerful, and it's where your soul begins its deepest work. Have you ever felt that ache for something more, even when everything on the outside looked perfectly fine? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your experience. Here, the shadow comes closer. It's no longer willing to be ignored. It shows itself in every emotional trigger, every strong reaction, and every unhealed wound that rises to the surface like a scream from deep within. And naturally, you want to run. Of course you do. You were taught to run from pain, to fix it, to cover it up with spiritual quotes, affirmations, or positivity. But awakening isn't about escaping pain. It's about facing it. It's not a shortcut or a bypass. It's a deep, honest confrontation. It's standing in front of a mirror and truly seeing the parts of yourself that feel broken or lost. You're not being asked to run from the pain. You're being asked to sit with it, to feel it, to learn from it. Because the pain isn't your enemy. It's the doorway. It's the crack where the light begins to enter. Slowly you start to understand. The sadness, the anger, the fear, these weren't flaws. They were messengers. Pieces of truth you buried just to keep going. And as you listen, something softens inside. You begin to feel something many of us forget along the way. Compassion, not just for others, but for yourself, for the child in you who wasn't comforted, for the teenager who built walls just to survive, for the adult who thought being productive meant being worthy. And with that compassion, something shifts. You stop trying to prove yourself. You stop chasing perfection. You stop needing to be healed. You realize that awakening isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming honest. Honest about your pain, your beauty, your contradictions. You are human and divine, brave and afraid, limitless and hurting. And it's that honesty that becomes your new foundation. Not fake confidence or false certainty, just truth. You no longer feel the need to convince others of who you are. You no longer force yourself to fit into spaces that dim your light. You stop sacrificing your truth just to feel accepted. Because now, you are your own safety. Not because you figured everything out, but because you've stopped running from the parts of you that hurt. You've stopped abandoning yourself, and that changes everything. Most people never reach this place, not because they're weak, but because they were never taught how to stay with the discomfort, how to sit in the unknown, how to stay with the soul long enough to finally hear it speak. But you're staying. And because you're staying, you're becoming something real. Not perfect, not polished, but rooted, true, and fully alive. That's the beginning of becoming unbreakable. You start to notice how much of your life was built on dreams that weren't even yours. Dreams passed down from culture, fear, and survival. Survival teaches you to shrink, to wear a mask, to trade your truth for approval, to hide your real needs behind a smile that doesn't reach your eyes. But you're not surviving anymore. You're awakening. And with that awakening comes a sacred rage, a deep, holy anger at the roles you played, at the lies you believed, and at the ways you betrayed yourself just to be accepted. But that rage, it's not a step backward. It's a resurrection. It's your soul remembering, I was never meant to live asleep. You begin to speak differently, not louder, just clearer. You say no without guilt. You say yes without over-explaining. You stop apologizing for being whole, and the world won't know how to respond to this version of you. Because the world taught you to blend in, to behave, to shrink. But now, you are a frequency. Have you ever felt like you're no longer willing to shrink, even if the world doesn't understand the real you? Let me know your thoughts. Your story matters here. You're no longer someone the world can predict or control. You're not living a version of truth that can be twisted. Now, just by being yourself, you reflect the unconscious in others. This is the quiet power of embodiment, not talking about awakening or posting about healing, but actually living it, breathing it, and becoming it in your everyday, unguarded moments. And no, it's not always beautiful. Sometimes it looks like crying in your car while your nervous system rewires itself. Sometimes it's losing people you thought were forever because your truth became too loud for their silence. Sometimes it's grieving a life you built with love, simply because you built it from a version of yourself that no longer exists. This is the real cost of becoming. You don't just lose illusions. You lose identities, routines, and comfort. You lose the structure that once held you up, but now holds you back. And what takes its place isn't immediate. It isn't clean or certain. It's a vast, holy emptiness, a space where the old no longer belongs, and the new hasn't yet arrived. You wake up not knowing who you are. You walk through the world feeling both ancient and brand new. You try to speak, but language feels too small. You try to plan, but the future laughs. Because this phase isn't about building, it's about listening. Listening to the quiet whisper beneath all the noise. The whisper that says, let go. Let go of timelines. Let go of blueprints. Let go of needing to understand what all of this means. Let life shape you. Let it strip away everything false. Let it show you what remains when there's nothing left to protect. And what remains? That's your truth. Not the polished persona, not your performance, not the curated image you wore like armor. What remains is presence, breath, the steady pulse of being fully alive, with nothing to prove. And in that stillness, you finally meet yourself. Not the person you hope to be, but the one who's always been there, the wild one, the wounded one, the one who came here with purpose, long before the world taught you to forget. You don't have to chase your purpose anymore. You start to become it in how you move, how you speak, how you stay soft even when life gets hard. You stop climbing toward meaning. Instead, you begin to embody it in how you walk, how you love, and how you no longer abandon yourself when the world gets dark. This is the deeper phase of awakening, the part no one really talks about, not because it's hidden, but because it can't be taught. It must be lived. It's not a destination or a mountaintop moment. It's a rhythm, a return, a remembering of the self beneath the shadow, the self before the roles, before the stories. And when you live from that place, not visit, but truly live, everything starts to shift. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Life gets quieter, but fuller. You stop explaining yourself to people who never really listened. You stop giving your power away to experts, systems, or social norms. You stop betraying your own knowing just to be liked. And then something beautiful happens. You stop chasing love because you realize you are it. You've always been it. Not in the mirror, not in someone else's eyes, not in the future, but right here, right now, within you. You begin to trust that the life aligned with your truth will come when it's time, that what falls away was never truly yours. And what stays, that will meet you on this deeper, realer frequency. You stop rushing your becoming, you stop begging for clarity, and you stop fearing the unknown. Because now, the unknown feels like home. Have you ever reached a point where you stopped chasing and simply started being? Where the unknown no longer scared you but felt like peace? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your journey. There is a different kind of strength that comes after your soul has collapsed. It's not loud. It doesn't show off. It doesn't shine in the way the world teaches you to measure power. This kind of strength is quiet, grounded, and deeply personal. It belongs to someone who knows who they are, without needing anyone else to see it. Because once you've let go of everything that isn't real, what remains inside you is unshakable. Not because it can't break, but because it already did, and came back stronger, deeper, and more whole. You don't move through life needing proof that you matter anymore. Now you are the proof, not for the world, but for your own soul. For the part of you that remembers how hard it was to reclaim your voice, to walk alone, to burn down the lies just to feel real again. This kind of strength isn't built overnight. It's forged in fire, in the shaking moments before truth arrives, in the long nights you weren't sure you'd survive. And now you're no longer just surviving, you're living in truth. Your life is simpler, not because it's easier, but because you're no longer wasting energy trying to be someone you're not. You don't build relationships out of fear of being alone. You don't trade your time for praise. You don't shrink yourself for acceptance. You've met yourself too honestly to pretend ever again. What once felt like punishment, the silence, the unraveling, the isolation, now feels like grace. Because it brought you here, to this stillness, to this inner peace that no one can give you and no one can take away. You see others running, performing, chasing meaning like shadows, and you don't judge them because you were there. You still carry the scars, but now you also carry the light. Not the light that blinds, the kind that invites, the kind that whispers, you don't have to run anymore. You're allowed to feel. You're allowed to come home to yourself. Some people will feel that light in you and begin to remember their own truth. Some won't. And that's okay. You're no longer trying to wake others up. You're just committed to staying awake, to staying grounded, open, and real. This is the quiet revolution, not fighting the system, but refusing to feed it with your energy, not preaching change, but becoming it. Your presence becomes a mirror, not the kind that flatters, but the kind that reflects. Some people will shatter when they see themselves. Others will awaken. But your job is not to fix their reflection. Your job is to remain clear, to remain rooted, to stay lit. That's how awakening becomes power, not through appearance, but through presence. You become unshakable not because you're invincible, but because you no longer live from the surface. You live from your source, from the self that was never really lost, only forgotten. And now, you remember. You remember how to rest without guilt. You remember how to feel without shame. You remember how to speak without shrinking. You remember how to walk through the world without needing to explain yourself, because now your existence isn't a question. It's an answer. You no longer ask, who am I supposed to be? You simply whisper, I already am. And that is the final threshold, not becoming more, but becoming you. All of you, the divine, the messy, the broken, the healing, the still becoming. It's all allowed now. You're not here to escape the human experience. You're here to fully live it with courage, with awareness, with love. That's why you survived your spiritual awakening. Not because you mastered it or rose above it, but because you stayed. You stayed in the fire. You stayed when it broke you. You stayed when you were empty. And in that staying, you were reborn, not into someone better, but into someone true. Now you carry something unspoken, a presence, a remembering, a calm, steady light, not made to impress, but to simply be. You no longer chase the next awakening. You live as the awakened. This is what most never reach, not because they can't, but because they turn back too soon. You didn't. You turned inward. You turned toward yourself, and you found home. So now walk, not to chase, but to radiate, not to prove, but to be, and let the world feel what can only be felt in the presence of someone who has touched the fire and chose to stay. Have you ever stopped running and finally felt at home in yourself, even when everything around you was still uncertain? Share your story below. Someone out there might need to feel what you found.